Hi there, boys and girls, and welcome back to Conquering Math, where it all adds up. Today we will learn how to divide with fractions. Let's dive on in. By the end of today's lesson, you will be able to divide by fractions and mixed numbers. The Common Core State Standard today is 6 NSA1. Before we learn how to divide by fractions, we need to learn about an important vocabulary term called reciprocals. Reciprocals are pairs of numbers whose product is 1. For example, 2 and 1/2 are reciprocals because 2 times 1/2 equals 1. So how do we find the reciprocal of a number? First, if your original number is a whole or a mixed number, write it as an improper fraction. For example, the number 3 becomes the improper fraction 3/1. Then you should invert or flip the fraction. So 3/1 becomes 1/3, or 1/3. This new number is the reciprocal of the original number. For example number 1, we will need to find the reciprocal of the given number. Part A, 3/4. We can skip step 1 because it is already a fraction, so we need to invert the fraction. So 3/4 becomes 4/3 because we flipped the numerator and the denominator. So the reciprocal of 3/4 is 4/3, or this can be simplified to 1 1/3. Part B, 2 1/2. First, we need to change to an improper fraction, so 2 1/2 becomes 5/2. And then we need to invert the fraction. We flip the numerator and the denominator, and 5/2 becomes 2/5. So the reciprocal of 2 1/2 is 2/5. Now it's time for the main event, dividing by fractions. We'll use 2/3 divided by 5/9 as an example as we go through the process. First, we need to find the reciprocal of the divisor, and we'll change the division sign into a multiplication sign. So we started with 2/3 divided by 5/9, and we changed this into 2/3 times 9/5. Now we just multiply the fractions as usual. 2/3 times 9/5 equals 18/15, which can be simplified to 1 1/5. For example number 2, we will need to evaluate 7/8 divided by 1/4. First, we need to invert, or find the reciprocal of the divisor, and change the multiplication sign to a division sign, and then we can multiply as usual. So we start with 7/8 divided by 1/4, and we find the reciprocal of the divisor, so now we have 7/8 times 4/1, and we can cross-reduce the 4 and the 8, and we find the fraction 7/2. 7/2 can be simplified to 3 1/2. So 7/8 divided by 1/4 equals 3 1/2. For example number 3, we will use mixed numbers. We need to evaluate 1 2/3 divided by 2 1/2. Our first step will be to change the mixed numbers to improper fractions. Then we'll find the reciprocal of the divisor and change the multiplication sign to a division sign. And then in the last step, we'll multiply as usual. So 1 2/3 divided by 2 1/2 becomes 5/3 divided by 5/2. Next, we need to change the division sign to a multiplication sign and find the reciprocal of 5/2. So we have 5/3 times 2/5, and we can cross-reduce the 5's, and we know that our final answer is 2/3. So 1 2/3 divided by 2 1/2 equals 2/3. Last but certainly not least, we'll take a look at a real-world example. Cam is going to shovel driveways this winter to make some extra money. The average driveway in Cam's neighborhood is 12 feet wide, and his shovel is 1 1/2 feet wide. If he starts each lap at the top of the driveway, how many laps will Cam need to clear the driveway? We know that this is a division problem because we're breaking the 12-foot wide driveway into 1 1/2 foot wide strips. So we start with 12 divided by 1 1/2, and we have to make both of these numbers into improper fractions, so we have 12 over 1 divided by 3 over 2. Then we need to find the reciprocal of 3 halves, which is 2/3, and change the division sign to multiplication. Next we can cross-reduce. 12 and 3 have a common factor of 3, so 12 gets cross-reduced down to 4, and 3 is cross-reduced down to 1. Then we multiply, and we find that the answer is 8. Cam will need 8 laps to clear the average driveway. Today you learned how to divide by fractions and mix numbers. The Common Core State Standard today was 6 NSA1.